Good afternoon and welcome. This is the Mary Grace Show combined today with the Dr. Shawn Baker Show. I'm Mary Grace, and we have with us also Dr. Shawn Baker. This is the Healing America and Beyond series, and we're teaming up here doing a little collaboration. So you may be watching on one of Dr. Baker's channels, you may be watching on one of my channels. Either way, we're very happy to have you here. And if you're wondering how people are finding this, one of the things I recommend is that you go ahead and jump on my website, marygracemedia.com, and get on the mailing list. We do send out an email right before the show to let you know that we are live. And that's really the best way to get that information. And we are live today on X. We are live on YouTube. We're live on Facebook, and we are also live on Rumble on the Mary Grace Media channel on Rumble. And so you can watch on either place, and we appreciate it. And please be sure and like, subscribe, follow, do whatever it is that they ask you to do on any given platform. But again, you don't want to miss notifications. Go to marygracemedia.com, get on the mailing list, and we will let you know usually within an hour before we go live for these shows. And so today we've got a lot to talk about, and we also are going to be doing some Q&A toward the end of the show. That is something that we promised the last time we talked, and Dr. Baker reminded me. And so we ask that you please hold your questions because they will get lost in the chat if you put them in now, and we don't want to miss your questions. So please hold on to your questions. But please let us know where you're watching from. We do have somebody here from Berlin, Germany, and it looks like we're getting more and more people coming in. So we do appreciate all of you, and we are happy so far about the success of this series. So we're going to keep it going as long as you guys are joining us.
Yeah, it looks like you can tell if they're from YouTube or Facebook or whatever, so that's cool. So we can see
Yeah,
if people are
yeah.
on.
So we
So
see we see
cool.
people jumping on
Yeah, there's that. So we're on
X.
multiple platforms. So there we go.
Yeah.
That's a cool thing.
And I just sent you my link, so you'll retweet that, so we'll get even more people coming
I
in.
already did it. I'm on top of it. I already did it.
Oh, he's okay. Excellent. It must be all that jumping you've been doing, all those like leap. What's your vertical leap now? What's your vertical
So
clearance?
I think, because yesterday I dunked a little tennis ball on a 10-foot rim, and my standing reach is about 8'2". So that puts me at about 25, 26 inches right now, which is not bad, given the average
Mhm.
58-year-old is probably around between 10 to 15 inches. So I'm probably close to double the normal person my age. So
Okay.
given that
All
I'm
right.
also 250 some pounds, which makes it harder still. So I'm pretty happy with that.
Mhm.
So
I
anyway,
wonder what my standing reach is. I'm
your
5
standing reach. Yeah, we'll just go up and reach up against the wall and put a tape measure up there and you can
I'm
see what you do.
5'5". I have pretty long arms. I never thought about that.
Yeah, you
Uh,
probably can reach up around 7 feet, I would guess, something like that. Maybe 6, 8 or something like that would be
okay,
my
so I
guess.
I got a
Yeah.
ways to go before I can dunk.
Yeah, it
Uh,
might be. It might be a bit of work. You could get there, but
yeah. Do you follow knees over toes guy? Speaking of dunking.
so Ben, yeah, I've seen Ben stuff for years. I mean, I
Yeah.
think his focus, obviously he dunks a basketball he talks about, but his focus has mostly been on improving knee health and knee function. And there's, I mean, and I know people saying, well, you got to go do knees over toes guys for junking, but there's a lot of stuff. I mean, the reality, I mean, the basic reality to be able to dunk a basketball, you just got to bring your strength level up. You've got to have, you got to right body composition. You can't, and I'm a little heavy. I need to probably get down to 240 to really get there. And then lots and lots of plyometric, isometric,
Mhm.
stuff that you need. Then there's some technique to it. You got to have it, with
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
approach and all that stuff. So I am, I've got plenty of research, and I dunked for the last time I dunked, I was 50. I mean, I've been dunking my whole life, so I know how to
Okay.
dunk a basketball. It's just I
Okay.
haven't worked on it in many years, and so it's time to get back
Without
to it
standing on a chair.
without standing on a chair. Exactly.
Yeah. So for those of you who aren't up to speed on what we're talking about, Dr. Baker has been posting a lot of his exercise videos, and we talked about that on the last show. We talked a lot about exercise, and I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that's actually really your sweet spot, your passion, even though you have become known as the leader, one of the leaders in the carnivore space in terms of diet. uh, it was pretty obvious to everybody listening that you just came alive when we started talking about fitness, and that's definitely your lane. So I'm sure we will get more questions about that. it's definitely inspiring. And one of the things, in case anybody missed the last episode, he really Dr. Baker really broke down sort of how to start and how to get into things like sprinting, especially if you have limitations, and how to do that safely, which I thought was incredibly valuable information. And so that was episode 4 of this Healing America and Beyond series. So definitely go watch that. It was, I think, the latter half of the show. And so we will, we'll revisit some fitness topics from time to time. But if you go to Dr. Baker's Instagram or his X, you'll see him jumping a lot because he's been working on dunks. So that's kind of fun. And I'm working on healing my body from some pretty intense autoimmune situations. So I'm not jumping right now, but I'm easing into just getting my body back and doing more healing. So I'm trying not to over stress, but at the same time I'm trying to emphasize strength and conditioning without sending my body into like cortisol hell. So it's definitely different. And speaking of bodies, do you want to start by talking about the weight issue? Because that seems to be coming up a lot, and you've made some comments about carnivore diet and weight gain and things like that. What do you think?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, a lot of people have tremendous success losing weight on carnivore diet. Many of them do it effortlessly. In fact, that's probably the experience for, dare I say, a majority of the people. Because they find, when they give up all this ultra processed stuff that drives excessive eating behavior. We know these ultra processed foods are literally designed to make us overconsume them, and we do regularly. That's probably one of
Yeah.
the leading causes of obesity, quite honestly. And so a lot of people will lose weight on carnivore. Now, some people will say you can eat unlimited amounts and eat until you're full and keep eating as much as you want, and you'll never gain a pound of body fat. And that's just, frankly, just not true. I mean, it's not true at all. There are,
I'm here to tell you that's not true.
yeah, I mean, there's certainly people that will eat. I do think it is very challenging to get like ridiculously obese, morbidly obese doing this, because there's a point where you can only eat so much meat where you're just like, I can't eat anymore. But to say you can't gain 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 pounds of body fat by just stuffing your face with fatty meat all day, it would be a lie. I mean, I see people making those claims that, once you get to a point where you eat too much fat, you just can't absorb it, and it goes out you just kind of waste it in the waste products, and that's not necessarily the case. I think my advice, and when I wrote the book, I talked about eating meat like it was your job, and I meant it in the sense that in the beginning, you want to eat enough so you don't want this other stuff, and it's a strategy so that you don't want to eat cake and pizza and breads and pastas or things, cakes and candies and things like that might be problematic for you. But once you kind of get past that point, then over that period of time, whatever it is, 2, 3, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, your body, figures out that we don't need this other stuff. We're no longer craving that. And it's reached this sort of equilibrium. And now you're kind of at this hormonally, the food is now the same. It's like there is a different hormonal impact when you're eating Frosted Flakes versus a ribeye steak. I mean, there's different
Mhm.
things that are occurring hormonally. But once, you're just eating steak or whatever the equivalent on a carnivore, a hamburger, whatever it might be, every day, day in and day out, the only way you're going to gain weight is to eat more. And the only way you're going to lose weight is typically to eat less. And I know there's people who say, well, I did this and this and it didn't happen that way. But in general, over time, I mean, there's always short-term adaptations. You can say, I went on vacation and I ate like a pig for a week and I lost weight. But I mean, but you think about, a lot, like I just got back from Spain and I ate damn near what I always eat and I lost a couple pounds. But I mean, I walk like 7, 8 miles a day, and you don't think about those things. And then the other thing that sometimes happens when you acutely eat more or acutely eat less, maybe your heart rate goes up, maybe your temperature goes up. And those are all, so this is the calories outside of the equation, which you have no control over. It's sort of
Mhm. Mhm.
automatic, voluntary things that happen. And so, I mean, you have to be, I mean, there's some level of reasonability here. This is why, these people that say that, calories are important and they matter, there's a truth to that, but it's not the only thing. I think when people say it's all about calories and nothing else matters, that's also problematic because there is an impact on the quality of the food and the types of food you have. So it's kind of a combination of
So
those
it's
things. You
not
can't.
just calories in, calories out.
It's
That's
it's not necessarily. I mean, because theory, in theory and in practice, you can eat more calories than you did before and actually lose weight. Now, it depends on the quality of those calories, how much is absorbed, how much of that is protein. Protein we know is going to have a higher thermic effect. So you could design a diet where you ate 2,000 calories of donuts, and then you ate 2,300 calories of protein. You would lose weight even though you ate more calories, most likely in that scenario. So
either
it's
or
yeah, I
on
mean,
the protein.
yeah, but I mean, the calories do have a role both on the in and the outside, but the outside is dependent upon the metabolism and the outside is dependent on the hormones. And so I can't sit there and just say, I'm going to raise my body temperature right now and just think about it. I mean, maybe if I run and get all sweaty, I can do that. But I mean, just sitting there, I can't say I think I'm going to operate at 99.7 degrees today. And tomorrow I'm going to run at 96.8. I mean, it doesn't happen. You don't have any
Yeah.
control over that. That is all dependent upon hormonal fluctuations, thyroid function, so on and so forth. So, but the quality of food affects those things. So in a way, it's a multifactorial thing.
Mhm, mhm. Well, and one thing, so, one person who comes to mind is, your friend, one of our friends, Bella, steak and butter gal, and so she was really malnourished, having been a vegan for years, and she was inflamed, she had all kinds of skin problems, she actually, didn't have her period for quite some time, and then when she started carnivore, she gained, I think, about 20 pounds. And it was not just muscle. People say, "Oh, you're gaining muscle." Well, no, and the same thing happened to me, like, it's not just muscle, like, you're getting bigger, right? Usually muscle is more compact. And so, your clothing sizes are going up, you're getting bigger. And, but then I think about a year in, she started to normalize and drop the weight. And now you look at her, she's very slender and that's all, she eats a lot. She eats high volume. Um, and so I think she's a good example and she talks about this. She's very open about it. Uh, but for people to say, everybody loses weight on carnivore, it seems like it's a lot, it seems like it's sometimes it's people who are, very heavy to begin with, who have a lot of weight to lose. Have you noticed, like, trends or certain groups, for example, like women post-menopause? Do you see a difference in, women like me, when it comes to this? I mean, it's been on my mind a lot because of what happened to me, right? You hear these stories of just this tremendous weight loss, and then you start doing carnivore, partly for health reasons, for everybody has a different reason or reasons, and then you gain weight, and you're like, I'm a little bit panicked right now because that's not what I thought was going to happen, right? So what do you see? Are there any trends or patterns that you see with different body types, different age groups, things like that? Or is it
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you have a lot of weight to lose, if you come in and you're 100 pounds overweight, it's pretty routine. And I would say the vast majority of those people will drop significant weight and sometimes very quickly. They might lose 60 pounds in 3, 4, 5 months,
yeah.
and that's not unusual at all. What often is the case, like you mentioned in the case of Bella, aka Steak and Butter Gal, when you come into something malnourished and maybe too thin, you may put on weight. I mean, it's not like, it kind of normalizes you or normalize you in the correct direction in many cases.
Mhm.
And even with body fat, I mean, women in particular, they basically just have more body fat than men do, and they need more body fat. And sometimes if you're very, very lean, you're going to put on body fat and maybe you were too lean. I mean, that can be an issue. I mean, we know that, like, when we look at, like, for instance, health outcomes and we look at BMI, once your BMI starts getting too low, then the health outcomes are actually negative. Once you drop below, say, BMI of about 18, then we start seeing, you know, negative health outcomes. And so the sweet spot
Mhm.
seems to be, you know, that 20 to 25 range, or 20 to 22 or something like that.
Okay.
And, you know, the other thing is you're correct to point out that a lot of times women more so than men, and particularly menopausal women, have a greater challenge with weight loss in general, and that's irrespective of any diet. It doesn't really matter. I mean, it's one of the
Mm.
things that many women lament about going through menopause is they start to put on fat, and they put on fat particularly around their belly more than they ever had in many cases. Because their hormonal pattern shifts, and the reason that women tend to store fat in their kind of hips and thighs, and guys tend to store it in their belly is there's a hormonal distribution pattern to that. And there's also a biomechanical pattern for that. Because if you think about, if I said I want to give you a backpack to carry around for 6 hours and it weighed 25 pounds, and I said, where do you want to carry that? And if you said, I want to carry it at the end of my arm on my hand, your arm would very rapidly get tired, right? And you wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah.
But as a guy, I want to put it where my center of mass is. And you think about where the center of a mass is from a man versus a woman. Well, men have broader shoulders. They have more musculature up top than most
Mhm.
women do. That raises their center of mass to about their belly button level. Whereas
Okay.
women have, you know, kind of equivalent muscular sized legs, but their shoulders are much slender and smaller. So then their center of mass is lower. And so it biomechanically makes more sense to carry that little bit extra body fat, you know, kind of in the hips. Whereas the guys, it makes more sense biomechanically around the belly. And that also is tied into hormones, because hormones, you know, we know based on our hormones what we are, male or female in most
Mhm.
cases. And therefore the hormonal deposition leads to that. And so
Okay.
women, as a general rule, tend to, you know, carry a little bit more body fat. But then as they go through menopause, that shifts to more of a male pattern. You're less estrogen dominant, and you become more kind of like a man in many ways. And so so the deposition of fat becomes more midline, more midsection. And so that is, you know, that's just the consequence of, you know, going through menopause. And there's not much you can do. Well, you can go on. A lot of people would advocate for bioidentical hormones in menopause, and that seems to be efficacious for a lot of women. And that might have some impact there. But I think the general, you know, the general rules don't change that much, in
Mhm.
that, you know, still got to be active, you still got to exercise, still got to get good sleep, you still got to eat appropriately, appropriate amount, appropriate quality. And quality is incredibly
Mhm.
important. um, a lot of women will gravitate to a very higher fat version of carnivore, you know, for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Some people say it helps with their mood, it helps with their mental health, it makes them feel better. And that does have a consequence with body fat deposition, depending upon how much you eat, you know. And you can certainly lose weight on a high fat diet. In fact, most people on a carnivore diet, irrespective of how lean they eat, is still going to be high fat relative to a standard diet. A standard diet,
Right.
most people would consider about 30% fat by calorie. Carnivore diet, the leanest people are going to be is around 50% for the most part, and that'll range up to maybe upwards of 85 to 90% fat by calorie. So most people like personally, I'd say 60% of my calories come from fat. So I'm still on a very high fat diet. It's also high in protein. You know, my protein is 40% of my intake or something like that, which, you know, the average American's eating about 15%. And the rest,
Mm.
obviously, carbohydrates are making the difference there. So it does
Right,
it does
right,
play a
yeah.
role.
Yeah, that makes sense, and then I think too, you know, women in general, women my age have spent many, many years dieting, and we also went through the fat-free phenomenon, which was just horrible on everybody's health, but I think it hit women pretty hard, women my age, because we came of age right when that was getting pushed into the mainstream. And so a lot of us spent about 20 years focusing on low fat, high carb. And then also that was the most, I think the busiest and most stressful years for a lot of women. And so then you end up with cortisol imbalances, right? You end up with autoimmune. You end up with all of the consequences of this perfect storm of poor diet, restrictive eating, yo-yo dieting, stressful lives, you know, because that's when women are doing careers, children, um, marriage. Like it's a very high stress time for women. And then you get to my age and you're kind of coming out the back end of that and you know, you're looking for a solution. And I think that you have to be realistic and say, yes, this is an incredible solution, but it's definitely not a quick fix for a lot of people, even though you can see certain results and changes quickly. I think you have to be realistic and understand, okay, it was 20 years of insanity or more for a lot of people, 20 to 30, maybe longer of this crazy low fat, high stress, high cortisol lifestyle, um, low sleep, all of these things. And then going through all the hormonal changes women go through, I think that you do kind of have to understand that women after a certain age kind of have their own category. And I'm saying this to the women out there because I see this a lot in the carnivore groups that women my age are like frustrated. They're just going, I've been doing this. I got this going on, this going on, this going on. Don't give up. um, you may just need to, you may need some other support too while you're in the process. And this is something you've talked about. Like, don't just drop all your meds if you're taking prescriptions and things like that. And also work with a team that can help you if you need that, right? And that's something you guys are doing with Revero. You're
Yeah,
helping.
yeah, exactly right. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it is something, and I mean, there's a lot of people that start a diet. I mean, you don't need a doctor to start a diet. I mean, your grandmother can tell you what to
I
eat.
mean,
And there's
like with
no,
your meds, like if you're on
no,
meds.
no, exactly. That's the point I'm trying to make. Is
Yeah.
like, there are, if you're on medications, particularly depending on the type of medication, and you dramatically change your diet, um, there can be problems with that in some cases. If you're on high, blood pressure meds, and you change your diet, and all of a sudden you become hypotensive and your blood pressure is really low, you could conceivably, have a problem where you like stood up, got lightheaded, fell down, and whack your head, or you're diabetic and you're on all these blood glucose lowering meds, and all of a sudden you change your diet, and now your blood glucose is bottomed out and you're hypoglycemic, and then the same thing happens. You have an injury, you fall down, God forbid you have a seizure or something like that. That's known to happen with profound hypoglycemia. Same thing with like psych meds, the antidepressants, SSRIs, like
Mhm.
things like gabapentin, those types of medication, or Neurontin is known, trade wise. Those things all have strict taper protocols. Or if you're on multiple blood pressure medicine, which one do you stop first? Well, there's known ways you're supposed to do that. So yeah, it's helpful to have doctors that are used to it. And our doctors are all used to taking people off meds, because that's mostly what we do. We rarely put people on new meds. We're mostly taking them off meds, because of what we're doing with the support we're providing, and we're effectively achieving remission of many conditions. We're seeing it, and we just, we have, and our patients, they graduate. I mean, we don't keep them forever. We don't
Mhm.
sit there and say, see you for the rest of your life. Here's your meds for the rest. So we get people fixed, and then, maybe 6 months later, 8 months later, we're like, okay, fly free, give you the tools and the power. And I think that's a way we should be doing it. We should be curing diseases. We should be seeking to get people actually healthy, not just medicating their
Yeah.
symptoms, which is what healthcare has devolved into, unfortunately, because it's very profitable. That's the reality of this, and
Mhm.
it's a sad reality, and I think it's doing a disservice to most people. And
Yeah, so you're really about empowering and helping people to take control of what their of their own health, right? Um, and I put that up on the screen. If people are just listening on audio, it's revero.com, revero.com. That's Dr. Baker's co-founder there, and that's telemedicine that is focusing on functional root cause and getting people free of these issues rather than creating lifelong subscriber patients, um, which is what the pharmaceutical industry does.
yeah, I mean, the pharmaceutical, I mean, the standard allopathic medicine is a better business model for sure, because you just have, you know, renewed subscriptions for the rest of their lives. This is like
Yeah,
all the new drugs that come out, the GLP-1s. Oh, you got to take them for the rest of your life. It's just like, and if you look at drug development, almost all drug development is designed for lifetime usage. I mean, this is where this is the model. None of them are looking at like a one shot, solve your problem, cure your disease. It just
right.
doesn't exist, because honestly, that's not the way you cure disease. So they're going to this, we want you to be on a drug for the rest of your life, and so we can collect money from you for the rest of your life. And
Mhm.
that that's a good business model. I can't blame them for doing that. I mean, you
Well,
can
it's yeah,
from the
especially
ethical
if
standpoint, but from the
yeah,
business standpoint, you can't blame them.
especially if it when insurance gets involved, right? Because then it becomes this sort of symbiotic relationship between the doctors and the insurance companies and big pharma. They're all entangled together. And, what do they say? A patient cured is a customer lost, right? And
Yeah.
you talk about disease management instead of actually helping people to get free of these things. So the allopathic model is about just managing, and a lot of times it's the system that we're in that creates these problems. The food system, the highly processed and things like that. And so when people do go on a carnivore diet, you're eating single ingredient foods and that's valuable because you are taking out all of those cofactors that are contributing to the disease and so you're restricting in order to gain freedom because then you gain the understanding and the knowledge of what it is that's actually contributing to these problems, especially if you start to reintroduce foods. That's one of the values of the carnivore diet is you really, really scale down the types of foods that you're putting in your body. And so you can get a really good indicator of what is the problematic food simply by reintroducing something. Once you're free of symptoms, you reintroduce something and then you have symptoms again and you go, okay, that was the food and where it's not worth it for me to have that in my life and I'm no longer going to eat that. Um, and I think that's what people miss when they talk about uh, people often ask like, what do you do about vegetables? Aren't you going to ever eat vegetables again? Aren't you ever going to eat fruit again? And I think when people start to understand, well, maybe somebody does reintroduce vegetables and then they get joint pain, then they get inflammation. And so why would you reintroduce those at all? Or why would you bring them back into your life if every time you reintroduce them, you have more problems? Just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, unless you like them, you've got like some people. I don't really like vegetables. I
Yeah.
never did. When I was a kid, I always like, it's like, and it's, for a lot of kids, it's a chore. The parents are arguing, fighting with
Yeah.
the kids, making you sit at the table for 6 hours until you eat that stupid broccoli.
That's how I felt about squash.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, yeah, it's like really slimy and just like not really. But but then
Just the
there's of
name.
course the people that have this sort of inherent belief that these things are good for me. Everybody's told me. My grandmother told me. My mom told me that. The
Yeah.
doctors are telling me I should eat my veggies. And so you've got that psychological aspect in there. And I think that it's interesting. And I put a post about this the other day saying that, a lot of people will say, look at these carnivores, they have eating disorders, they're scared of vegetables. And the reality is, I don't think you can be scared of these things. I think, some people get a really bad reaction. They're like, no, thanks, I don't need that. But most people finally just stop, they lose a desire for that,
Mhm.
because you think about how could I ever give up, cake and ice cream and cookies and candies and all and pastas and breads and all these things I love and pizzas. But then you do it for a while and you're like, I just don't really want that. I mean, and then maybe occasionally you'll go out and have some, and you'll find out that it wasn't as good as I remember it. It was kind of like, eh,
Mhm.
I don't get that same sense of satisfaction that I do with a kind of a nice ribeye steak or something like that, for instance. It's just kind of and it's mind blowing to people that suffer from or have some level of food addiction, or maybe even they just take comfort from those foods. It's like, oh, I had a hard day, I'm going to order a pizza, and I just eat that, and I get this. Oh, for a minute, I get this nice sort of dopamine hit, which
Mhm.
is then replaced by stomach pain or whatever 2 hours later. And so
Yeah.
for them, it's they can't comprehend that, and it scares them to think that they might have to give up these comfort foods. And there's nobody telling you have to. I mean, you can do whatever you want. I'm not anybody's mom. I mean, do whatever the hell you want. I don't care. But it's
Yeah.
just it's one of those things where we have such a unfortunate food environment, that we've kind of traded our health for convenience, and that is all, by all accounts, that is, full steam ahead on that front. I mean, there's always every year there's this, the Wild West Food Expo. I mean, I don't know what the name of it is, but there's like, all the new foods come out every year. There's a big convention.
Mhm.
They meet out in LA
Yeah,
and they have all the newest foods. And it's like, look, we're going to make purple, purple food with that. I don't know, that glows in the dark and has
yeah,
10 different flavor explosions or something. Yeah. It's just this constant need for novelty. And, but I look at like I've been breathing the same air, 70, whatever, 70% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, whatever it is, something like that. I think air is at sea level is about 21% oxygen. I don't sit there and go lament the fact that I want 14% oxygen. I want 19% oxygen a day. It's the same crap every
yeah.
day. And I don't even think about that. And if
Mhm.
somewhere were to invent like different airs, like you go to a different building and breathe different concentrations of air, and that could be the experience, people would want it all of a sudden. People would be demanding, how dare you force me to breathe the same air every day? I want that variety. But I mean, the reality is, as a human, as humans have evolved or lived historically, the food supply has been very, very narrow. It's only now in the last 10, 20, 30 years where we've got, you go to the grocery store and there's 12 different types of gummy bears. It's like, oh God, I don't even need one. I don't need any, but now there's 20 of them. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it is, and I think I recently saw somebody talking about the carnivore diet, and this is somebody who had a number of life-changing medical improvements by going carnivore, and he said when he first thought about starting carnivore, it took him a while to embrace the idea, and then one day he realized this is he told himself, instead of saying, "I'm gonna change my whole life and completely change the way I eat forever," he told himself, I'm gonna do this for 30 days. I'm gonna eat this way for 30 days, and then I'm gonna reevaluate." And he said that was really freeing for him because it wasn't a major, um, lifestyle commitment of thinking of never ever having some comfort food that you like again. And so, he actually did end up being strict carnivore just because of the benefits he was seeing, but he was taking it pretty much 30 days at a time. And he was never telling himself, "You can't ever have X again." He was just telling himself, "Right now, I'm prioritizing this. I'm focusing on this because I am, focused on changing this part of my health, whether it's mental health, anxiety, uh, joint pain, those types of thing." He just kind of simplified the whole process of saying, "This is a concern. I'm eating this because I've heard and read from people like Shawn Baker that this can help me." And so it's a 30 days. I'm giving it 30 days. That's it. And then after 30 days, he saw such good results, he's like, "Okay, let's go another 30." And so for some people, those little, um, biohacks, or what is it? It's sort of like a feedback loop where you're kinda telling yourself every day, "Alright, I'm on day 2, 28 more days. This is what I'm doing right now." And whatever it takes, biofeedback, right? Whatever it takes to get you there and to notice the changes, then you start to see the benefits. But for people who do have addictive behaviors, sometimes it's overwhelming to think about letting something go forever. It's big. It's a huge, overwhelming leap. And so maybe that's not the right message to give yourself in the immediate. It's just one day at a time. We're just going to let's try 30 days to make this change, to get the ultra processed out, get the artificial out, focus on like single ingredient animal foods. That's it, right? I think
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
it.
it's there's some correlations for with regarding like alcoholism. I mean, you've got alcoholics that they go through AA and they abstain, and they just they just can't reintroduce. If they reintroduce, they relapse and have
Mhm.
problems. And there's certainly people like that with food. And so for some of those people, yeah, you can't have Oreo cookies anymore or whatever it might be. But I
Right.
mean, for the vast majority of people, it's just, you can change your relationship with food. And now you can still, like, I personally, I've been doing this 9 years. I will have a piece of cake every once in a while. I mean, it
Mhm.
might be once or twice a year, not enough to make much of a difference at all. But it doesn't. It's not a habit. I don't really want it. That maybe I'll do it like on a kid's birthday just to say, okay, I'm
Mhm.
celebrating your birthday with you. I'll make a exception to this.
Right.
But it's not something I do engage in very regularly at all. It's extremely rare at this point. And I used to not be that way. I was the guy that would, dessert after every dinner. It was like dinner, dessert. They went
Really?
together. They were just like, yeah, where's my piece of cake? Where's my something sweet? I don't do that anymore. I don't want to do that anymore. I don't
Mhm.
desire it. It's not that I don't want to. I just don't really, there's no desire for it, which is to me really freeing in a way, because people say, well, it must be restrictive. But the reality is it's mentally freeing, which
Mhm.
I think is kind of priceless in many ways.
I think so too, and I think one of the things that I noticed was you don't have to take emergency food with you when you leave the house. So if you're satiated on enough fat and protein, you're not having these sugar dips. Whereas like when I was on more of a plant-based lifestyle, you kind of had to feed the beast all day long. And when you got, even like within an hour or two of eating, you would have these wild sugar dips. And so you had to have emergency food with you when you left the house, which was, like you're going on to do errands and you have to have food in the car. That's not the case with carnivore because you're so stable. Your blood sugar is so stable. So there's not, at least for me, like there's not a sense of being hangry, which is kind of a big deal. And speaking of hungry, we do need to take a quick break here to hear from one of our sponsors. And this is perfect timing because we're going to talk about beef. We have our friends that help sponsor today, and that is our friends at griddownchowdown.com. This is what do you do if you are storing a bunch of meat and the grid goes down and you lose your power? Well, you have a stash of grid down, chow down freeze-dried beef, and this is American-grown, American ranchers that are doing an amazing thing. They're freeze-drying, ground beef. They also have burger patties. They have, fajita steak meat, things like that, and you can just go to their website, griddownchowdown.com, and use promo code Mary Grace, and you will get some specials by using that promo code. So it's right there. One of the specials is that if you do the subscription, you're going to get some buy one get one deals, and that's where they send it to you every month. They do prioritize the subscriptions, and keep in mind that this is a family-owned business, so you're not getting the super quick turnaround that you would get if you're ordering from something like Walmart or Amazon. So just keep that in mind. They are kind of more of a boutique business, and so they're making to order. And so please be sure and check that out. I'll put the link up here on the screen. This is American freeze dried beef. It is griddownchowdown.com, and then use promo code Mary Grace. That is a perfect sponsor for the show that we're having today. And again, we want to remind you that Dr. Baker has Revero.com as a source for you to get the help that you need with your health questions and hopefully with reversing some of these things and getting you graduated from a lifetime prescription model to freeing yourself through diet and lifestyle. So that's revero.com. Um, and let's see, should we jump? Let's jump into some questions. We have a couple of questions, and this is the time, whatever platform you're watching on, if you have a question, start with QQQ. That way we know that it's a question. We can easily pull it out of the chat and let us know what your questions are. Did you see the questions in the beginning of the show, Dr.
Yeah, yeah,
Baker?
I can,
Okay.
yeah, some
All
thoughts
right.
on grass-fed butter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean,
Something else.
I think the one sort of caveat I would put out there is that the definition of grass-fed is probably not what you think it is when it comes to labeling. And so, if you think your cow is only eating grass when it finishes, that may or may not be true, even if it says grass-fed on the label. So I just want to put that out there. There's the USDA or the grocery store labeling is often very deceptive, even when things like grass fed, whether it's grass finished beef. So you know, just buyer beware, but it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. I don't think there's anything wrong with other butter too, to be honest, for the most part. I mean, they're starting to mix some butters with some of these other weird oils. I'd be cautious on that, but standard regular butter, probably fine. Grass-fed
Mhm,
butter, fine. Probably not that much difference between them, to be honest.
mhm.
Um,
I've noticed with the spreadable butters, you really have to watch for oils.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it changes the consistency of it. There's a question about what about people who totally believe plant-based is better? Um, Yeah, I mean, believe whatever you want. I mean, and again, I don't tell people to believe me. You should not believe, trust me or trust anyone implicitly. Just test it out for yourself. See, I mean, I got a lot of people that, I mean, Mary says she kind of was mostly plant based at one time, and now she's carnivore. She can probably relate her experience. I can tell you the majority of the people that have come from plant-based to go carnivore will almost always say carnivore was way better for them
Yeah.
in their own experience. Now, I mean, you can point to various studies out there, but they're not necessarily reflective of your own personal experience. And so, I don't know if you want to comment, Mary, on that.
I will. One of the things I mentioned earlier is that when I was mostly plant-based, first of all, I was consuming a lot of seed oils, because I was focused on the quality. For example, if it was, organic, non-GMO, expeller pressed safflower oil, things like that, I was under the illusion that that was, a healthier than something like Crisco. Turns out it's not, it's all industrial seed oils. But the other thing that was happening too is that I was never really satisfied. I never really hit satiety, which, was a big deal because I mentioned earlier that I would have to take emergency food, and I was hungry all the time because my blood sugar was not remaining stable throughout the day. And the fact is I was borderline, um, insulin resistant. So I was really pushing pre-diabetes. My A1C was creeping up there. And that was on a plant-based diet that I thought I was pretty healthy. And I was eating organic green shakes and things like that. The other big thing, two things, was joint pain. I've had knee problems for years and years. I've had all kinds of treatments. I was doing knees over toes type of exercises, and still had this sometimes shooting pain in the front of my, especially one knee on the left side, and that is virtually gone with eating a high fat ketogenic diet, mostly I would say ketovore. Uh, and and then my mood, the anxiety lifted, and that was something that didn't improve really on a plant-based diet. It was always this low level undercurrent of anxiety, and that is something that I never actually thought of that as being a food-based situation. I thought it was some kind of moral failing, you know, that I couldn't control my emotions or that I was not having enough faith or that I was somehow failing on a personal level that I couldn't get through situations without having this strong undercurrent of anxiety. And so it is a personal decision when and every time I think every time you add something or every time you decide that you want something in your life, a big question becomes, what am I willing to add? What am I willing to give up? And I think it's the same with carnivore. Are there things that I'm willing to take out of my life, out of my diet, in order to have more mental clarity, in order to have no knee pain, um, to be able to do the things that I want to do? For me, it's yes. It's yes, this is worth it. It's worth it for me to prioritize fat and meat over whatever organic plant-based snack food I was eating. Um, and so that was kind of a no-brainer for me. Again, it's a personal decision though, I think. And some people, they just think no matter what happens, I just for different reasons, they don't want meat, they can't tolerate it, or they just feel like they can't. One thing I will tell you is that I didn't think that I could tolerate meat, especially after I had COVID, because that kind of wrecked my system and even my taste buds and my smell. But once I started to reintroduce meat, that intolerance or aversion went away. So if you have a meat aversion, don't just assume that it's forever. There could be something going on with you that is making it harder for you to be around meat or to consume it. But it wasn't a forever thing once I started. And I started back with just a lot of bacon. That made everything palatable for me, and now I hardly eat bacon. I eat almost only beef and eggs and tallow and some butter. Those are my go-to carnivore foods. That would not have been appealing to me right in the beginning.
Yeah, it's interesting with bacon because a lot of people think, oh, you just eat all this bacon all the time. And it really does lose its appeal. At least I rarely eat. I mean, once in a while I'll have it, but I mean, it's like,
Mhm.
I mean, probably it represents less than, you know, 1% of my diet, probably not even, a tenth of 1% of my diet, quite honestly. Um, so there's another question here about like somebody asking, this is what Texas Liberty, I think, says, asking about
Yep.
how long does it take to see significant weight loss. I don't know that there's an exact number I could give you. I tell people that are going to do the diet, 3 months is a good trial, right? To see if you're going to get a result of benefit. Now, that result may be better mood, better cognition, better joint pain, better, less inflammation, weight loss may be part of that. Some people, there's many people that honestly don't lose a lot of weight for significant periods of time. But they feel so much better that they're like, yeah, Mary's pointing herself, but they feel so much better. They're like, this is
Yes.
worth it to me, even though the weight loss isn't there. And I think that that's, when I wrote my book, The Carnivore Diet, specifically, I remember writing a section on weight loss because I didn't really focus on weight loss. There are many, many, many diets that can allow you to lose weight. Whether you can keep it off consistently over time is often a different story. You can go on the potato soup diet, you can go on the South Beach diet, you can go on the whatever, you guys all know there's plenty of diets out there. I think that, and you mentioned you walk a lot and you don't, do any strength training. I personally, I would just feel remiss not to mention this. I think that diet is incredibly important for weight loss. It's probably the most important variable, but it's not the only variable. And I think sleep is important. I think good sleep is incredibly important. And diet can impact your sleep, depending on what you eat and when you eat. Personally, I think eating late at night is a mistake for most people, particularly if it's a big meal. Um, there are, activity, like I said, if you're taking a lot of steps, it's good. You're not sedentary. I think things like, our relationship with the sun, how we interact with light is important. Um, you know, again, we shouldn't be, blasting our eyes with a bunch of blue light at night. But I mean, the thing with carnivore is some people, like I said, the weight just falls off, and there'll be people complaining that they can't eat enough. That his weight's just falling off. How do I keep the weight on? Conversely, there's people that say,
Mhm.
"Man, I went carnivore. I was strict as can be, and the weight just didn't move." And that's sometimes a harder group. I think that's when you start pulling some of these other levers, and then you need to realize that how much you eat does matter. It is not necessarily an all you can eat ribeye buffet by any means. For some people, it is, but for some
Mhm.
people, it's not. So I think you have to start playing with some of the other variables you can. Once you're carnivore and you're not eating carbohydrates, there's no more. You can't go any lower. That you can't go negative carbs. Zero is zero.
Yeah.
You can start playing with the protein and fat ratios. You can start playing with some of these other variables: sleep, exercise, strength training, which I think is wonderful. I think women should be strength training. I think just period. End of story. Stop. Don't care if you like it or not. Do it regardless. Find a way to make it enjoyable because it's going to have such a tremendous benefit to you. Now, it doesn't have to be you're in the gym deadlifting, but there are ways to get stronger. I mean, that that might be enjoyable, or at least not enjoyable. You know, and then like I said, that becomes an incredibly effective, powerful tool, and you you should certainly leverage it.
Some people, I think, too, find that dairy can either put the weight on or prevent them from losing weight. So sometimes it's little tweaks like that, like if you're adding heavy cream or if you're eating a lot of cheese. So that's something to look at too. I've noticed that seems to come up a lot in conversation. Um, I want to read this question because I think this has to do with volume eating, and this comes up a lot. Brian on YouTube is saying, I tend to overconsume calories no matter what diet I follow, including carnivore. What would you suggest to lose body fat but still not overeat on carnivore? I think you addressed some of that.
Yeah, I mean, you could go on the all cockroach diet and you probably lose weight. I mean, that would probably, I
What
think
about
you
the sardine diet?
well, yeah, maybe that too. I mean, there's people out there doing these sardine fasts, and I'm like, yuck. Yeah, I mean, but I mean, the reality is sustainability. You cannot sustain a diet where you just hate the food. You're just not going to do it. So, I mean, I think that in one thing, and in many ways, I'm a guy that can eat a lot of food. I mean, I used to walk around routinely eating 8,000 calories a day. I mean, that was just normal for me, and I did that
You
for
and
20.
Michael Phelps.
Yeah, I mean, I did that for like 20 years. But I walked around at 285. I mean, for reference, I'm 250ish right now, and I still can put it away. If you told me eat as much as you want and you're not going to gain weight, I could easily sit there and eat 4, 5, 6 pounds of ribeye steak every day, and I would gain fat, and I will, and I do. So I think it's something that you have to sort of one timing of meals is very important in many ways. I mean, you just kind of train your body when to eat in relationship to your daily schedule. I mean, I find for me what works really well is if I can push that first meal back a little bit and it's a big meal, like instead of eating at 10, I might eat at noon. So if I eat this big meal at noon, then I can, make it longer into the day without hunger. And then maybe that late night, that later meal of, something small is all I need to get to bedtime. Right.
Mhm.
And then the other thing is to realize that cravings that you might have, which drive you to eat, are hormonally driven for the most part. Particularly if you're overweight. If you're like emaciated, then you need to eat, right? There's like, yeah, you're starving to death. But if you're not starving to death, you got an extra body fat, you're clearly not going to starve anytime soon. So, it's just like I have this craving. Um, then it's like, what's your plan for those cravings? And most people will say, what do you mean? What's my plan? So if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. I mean, that's really clear. So we
Mhm.
know these cravings are temporary. They're mediated by hormonal fluctuations, maybe 30, 45 minutes of craving. And then you get through past that, then often you're good. So let's say you have a craving at 7 p.m. and normally you go and you either maybe cook up another steak, or more often than not, people are eating ice cream and chocolate and things like that. Um, and then they feel crappy afterwards, right? That's always happens. You eat
Mhm.
it, you feel good in the moment. It's like you're like a kind of like a drug addict. You're like, "Rah," and then you go sit like, oh, I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
So if you know, but I mean, the biggest sort of thing to know is these cravings are time limited. And if you can just say, like, I'm going to distract myself, I'm going to go for a walk, I'm going to go phone call, I'm going to whatever, do something that's helpful. The other thing is just volume expansion of the gut fluid. Chug a bunch of water, your gut until you get uncomfortable. That's gonna make you uncomfortable that you want to eat something for about 30 minutes until your body absorbs it. That may be all you need to get those cravings to pass. So a good strategy now that it's springtime and it's nice pretty much most places, 7 p.m. you got this big craving, chug a bunch of water, go walk around the block for a couple times, and then come back. And then more often than not, and you just start making that happen. And then eventually what happens is you're sort of that sort of habit of stretching the gut out and eating all this food sort of goes away, and you just don't have the volume, the tendency to crush that volume like you used to. So those things are some techniques that might be helpful.
One thing can I add to that? Because I think, for some people too, drinking a warm beverage helps. So like broth, bone broth with some sea salt added, that kind of can take the edge off of that hunger. And for people who are used to habitual ritual type eating, sometimes it's like a mindless thing. If that's something that you find that you need the stimulation, right? Because it gives you dopamine or whatever. It's like you're sort of replacing, like Dr. Baker's saying, you're changing your habit. But if you absolutely must have something in your hand and be putting something in your mouth, then it becomes just changing what it is. So instead of, sitting there mindlessly eating something out of a bag and putting it in your mouth, make a cup of broth with collagen in it, something like that, where you're still having that action, that a lot of volume eaters and overeaters are used to doing, but do it with something that, like Dr. Baker's saying, that happens to, still fill up your stomach, still give you that feeling of putting something in your mouth, but you're not actually adding 3,000 calories at a time, right? That becomes it's not negative, but a cup of broth is not nearly gonna do to you what 3 or 4,000 calories worth of food is gonna do. Um, yeah, so, what's next, Dr. Baker? Do you see
Let's see. We got a question here.
gastric sleeve? Do you see that one from
Yeah,
X?
10 years post gastric sleeve. How can I specify do a carnivore diet? So if you have a vertical gas, VSG vertical gastric sleeve, they've taken out, a significant portion of your stomach capacity. This is the kind of I think the most current version of bariatric surgery that's very popular, or at least over the last few years anyway. Maybe something's changed from that. So you got to dramatically decrease stomach capacity. And so by necessity, you're probably gonna have to eat smaller volumes. I mean, that's probably something you already know. You can certainly apply that to carnivore. Many people on carnivore diet will just eat twice a day. That's pretty typical. It's because they're just not hungry. In your case, depending on your size, eating twice a day, you probably starve to death because you can only get so much food in there. So you're probably going to have to eat,
Mm,
4, 6 meals, small meals a day. I think I would be cautious around things like rendered fats, just because, if you eat a decent volume of rendered fat, which is kind of liquid pure fat, so think butter, think grease, bacon grease, hamburger grease, whatnot, that is going to probably overwhelm your capacity to absorb it because it's not going to sit in your stomach very long. It's going to get dumped into the small intestine. It's going to overwhelm that absorption capacity. Same thing can be said for somebody who's missing a gallbladder or recently had a gallbladder out, or just isn't used to fat in general. I mean, the rendered fats can be more problematic. So I like whole unprocessed fats. So i.e. a steak, where it's, if you can afford it. I mean, not everybody can afford to eat steak, but in the capacity you can, if you can only eat ground beef, which is fine too. I mean, just don't overcook it. So all the juice, so you have all this grease running around. It's kind of cook it to, like you're eating a burger patty, cook it medium, you don't necessarily cook it to, where it's all the juice.
mm.
You just want to get away from eating the fat by itself separate from the protein. And if you can keep the protein and the fat together, it's less likely to kind of, overwhelm your absorption capacity because it's going to be absorbed more slowly.
One thing I found with render I was having trouble absorbing fat altogether, and I don't know if this applies with somebody that has a gastric sleeve, but, when I started increasing my sea salt intake, that was a game changer for me, to be able to, uh, process the higher fat with this type of eating. So, my functional medicine doctor told me that, and I had tried digestive enzymes, and it didn't really help. But the adding the sea salt, like, I add about 2 about quar 2/3 of a teaspoon a day, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when you measure it out, you realize you're not actually adding that. If you're not eating processed foods, the salt is not there, so you actually have to be a little more intentional about adding it. But that was for me. Some people who are on carnivore don't even add any salt, but that's because, I just have other issues. I have autoimmune and, gut issues and things like that. So, that was a big help to get me over that hurdle. Uh, what about, do you wanna talk about the methylene blue, or is that a little bit off topic?
I know that's something that I have commented on before, and I know there's a lot of advocates for that, and I know RFK has supposedly been using it, and they say that it has, these impacts on mental acuity and revs up your mitochondrial system and so on and so forth.
Mhm,
And I think and there's a guy named Chris Masterjohn who is a quite a prolific writer on Twitter who had a very nice post on methylene blue, and he talks about that the efficacy to that is probably limited to a few scenarios, stressful scenarios where it might be beneficial in a specific setting, like trying to hold your breath really long underwater, or maybe you're on a plane and you have a reduced, you know, different reasons for this. And beyond that, and some of the claims being made around that are just hyperbole and the typical supplement sales job, you know, type of stuff. I've never used it, to be honest. I probably never will. I suspect, I may be wrong here, but I suspect 3 years from now, almost no one's going to be talking about methylene blue. They're going to be on to the next thing. It'll be the next whatever.
yeah,
It'll be the next peptide or whatever. You always everything's goes through hype. I but I'll be transparent with my bias. My bias is most supplements are a waste of money. I don't care if there's AG1 greens or whatever, or liver
mhm,
pills or whatever, carnivore supplements. I think it's
yeah,
all scammy and not worth your money. There are a few that have come along that have stayed and they've proven the test of time. One would be things like creatine. Creatine's been around for, now almost 35 years. I think people have been using it primarily initially as an athletic ergogenic type thing. I used it when it first came out, back in the early 90s. I remember using it. And my bench press went up I was bench pressing 225 for, 18, 19 reps, and I was able to get it to 23, 24 reps by using creatine. It does have an effect. It's had thousands and thousands of clinical trials on it and have shown repeatedly that it's efficacious. Now it's
mhm,
being
mhm,
bandied about in high doses for things like brain health and cardiovascular health. And and again, I don't take creatine. I eat a lot of creatine because I'm eating, 3 pounds of red meat a day. So I find it to
right,
be less compelling for me to do that. But I mean, I think some of these things, I just I try to say, okay, let's just see what happens in a few years. And I mean, I don't know, unless it's an emergency that you feel like, and a lot of people feel this way. Oh, this new guy's talking about this great thing. I better get on there and get this. You've got this FOMO, fear of missing out type of thing going on. So I just tell people that just, give it a couple of years and see what happens. I mean,
right,
is there some drastic emergency that you can't wait to stick blue stuff on your tongue? Um, I don't know.
mhm,
That's my philosophy. I mean, when I was training to be a surgeon, one of the training surgeons told me, and one of my attendings said, "Hey, it's never good to be the very first, but it's not but also don't be the last guy." So it's just basically
yeah,
let stuff play out, let the people that they can experiment with that, but the hype is always there. I mean, the internet is a hype machine, and you just don't know it's true. And now it's gotten even worse. You've got all this AI created crap that who knows if it's true or not. So
mhm,
it's gonna be really hard to discern this stuff. So I would just say wait a little bit and see what happens and see if it's still there, because there are some people that will actually have problems with this stuff, quite honestly. Or most likely, the most likely scenario is, people will say, I feel something, I feel a buzz, but I mean, it's just like, a lot of these like pre-workout, they just throw a bunch of caffeine in there, caffeine buzz, and they think it's a magical effect. And the reality is, but what did it actually do to me long term? Is it provided
mhm,
a benefit? What if you get dependent on this stuff and you can't function without turning your tongue blue every 6 hours? Then where are you at?
mhm.
Because so you gotta figure out what's
Yeah,
think about that. What if I got to a point where I was addicted? I don't say addicted to this stuff, but I felt bad if I didn't take it every day.
dependency.
When you don't want the come down to be worse than what you achieved with that. So it's one of those things where I would just say be mindful of those problems.
Yeah, interesting. It looks like we have one more question. Do we have time for that?
The question is there about,
Yeah, insulin. It's John on X. I'm not insulin. How I'll read it. I'm not insulin resistant or anything, but had my cholesterol rise and liver enzymes elevate after 6 weeks of carnivore. I had no weight change, but my body composition is improved. I'm 28% body fat down from 31%. Any suggestions?
Well,
So,
again, I would say, I mean, good that your body composition is improving. 3%, depending on how it's measured, how reliable that may or may not be. I mean, a lot of times you can look in the mirror, and if you've got less, less, some of you guys remember that Special K commercial. Can you pinch more than an inch? You reach
mhm,
down, if you can grab more than an inch, and it's a problem. And so you want to get to that point where you can't pinch an inch. I mean, I think that's where you need to
mhm,
get. So improving that is generally going to be a good thing. I don't think there's any negatives to improving your body composition, to a point. You don't want to get emaciated, but there, as far as the sort of, changes in a couple labs, one, we have to realize that these are dynamic labs. They change every day. So you could take them tomorrow and they might be very different reading. You have to realize that, particularly in a transition phase, if you say I'm at 28% body fat and I need to get down to say 15%, I think that's a pretty reasonable target for a man. Um, I don't know that it helps to do a bunch of labs during that process. I think because things are flux, there's a lot of flux going on. There's a lot of lack of homeostasis going on. Um, like for instance, liver enzymes, they can bump from exercise. I mean, literally a hard workout can bump your liver enzymes for a week.
mm,
And so I think you just have to put these things into context. And I would say that if I were to say what is one thing I would measure, I would just measure your waist to height ratio. And you just take your height in inches and you subtract and you divide it by your waist, or you actually, you take your waist in inches and divide it by your height, and that number should be um less than half. It should be less than 50%, closer to maybe 46%. That would be considered optimal. And I would
okay.
focus on that and just worry about that for a while. And then you'll see how these other things in your life relate to that. How does my joints feel? How does my sleep? How does my mood? Am I still snoring? How's my libido? How's my digestion? How's my mental clarity? How's my skin? All those types of things should improve just on that metric alone. So, I mean, when we get distracted with these numbers that fluctuate, I've had my cholesterol vary 200 points in less than 24 hours. So it's like, well, which one is real? Which is the one I should worry about?
Mm,
I don't know.
interesting.
I mean, it's so I tend to
Yeah.
focus on the more chronic things. And then just in general, I know we didn't get to talk much about cholesterol today, but I think my sort of belief around cholesterol is that it is not something we can ignore just because we're on a low carb, keto, or carnivore diet. It may have an impact on our cardiovascular health. Cholesterol is necessary. We need it. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying you need to drive it down to zero, like some people say. Some folks in a lipid and cardiology clinic are sorry, specialties might say. I would say that depending on your age, if you're over 40, it's probably wise to get some kind of imaging. You're irrespective of what diet you follow, irrespective of what your cholesterol is. It's probably helpful to know what's going on in here so that you can properly um, assess risk, plan for risk, modify risk in those ways.
And
So
what kind
anyway,
of imaging? What would be the
so I think
imaging?
the first thing that I would get over age 40 is something called a coronary artery calcium scan, a CAC scan. It can be done most often without a physician, in the US at least. You don't need a doctor to order it. You can order it yourself online. It usually costs somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 to $200. And get it one time, get a baseline, know where you're at, and then it's something you can follow up with. Maybe get it again 5 years later or 3 years later or something like that. So you can get an idea of what's going on. That's a good place to start. And there's more advanced imagings, which are more invasive and more costly, which some people might benefit from as well.
Mhm, and that scan you're talking about, the coronary artery, there are, different people who are I know, like, Dr. Berry posts about this. There's ways to get these types of scans and order them even if your primary care doctor doesn't do it. There's ways to get labs, that you can do. I don't have those sources right now, but, maybe somebody in the chat also can drop that to you, and give you that information, or Dr. Baker can drop it in the replies on X. Um, So, Dr. Baker, we started out today behind the scenes talking about the keto CTA scan, and we didn't get to that in the conversation. Do you want to touch on that really quickly, or you want to bring it back around next time we?
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
I think we may be in more, and I think we'll have more details next time because there's a
okay,
lot of back and forth and flux, and there's thought of the paper that was put out is not the actual paper, and so
okay.
so I think it might serve us better to wait another couple weeks to see what transpires with that.
Okay, all right. So we'll put a pin in that. And we appreciate everybody being here. We're actually a little over time today, and we had some great questions. So it's always good. I think people really get a lot of benefit from hearing the questions and also the answers from somebody with the depth of knowledge and understanding of Dr. Baker. And then you get my opinion and my personal life experience thrown in, and hopefully that helps as well. And so again, if you want to make sure you don't miss these shows when we do the Healing America and Beyond, please go to my website, marygracemedia.com. You can sign up for the email list there. Also, remember to support our sponsors. We have griddownchowdown.com, promo code Mary Grace. That is freeze dried, American grown, grass fed, grass finished beef. Tremendous resource, whether you like to prep or you just like the convenience of having something that doesn't need any refrigeration or freezing. It's not jerky, it's freeze dried beef. And then I wanted to mention too, Dr. Baker's book, The Carnivore Diet, is available through this link here on Amazon. And it also is available on Audible. And you can go here, scan the code here, and get a free trial on Audible. And then you can go and download his book and listen to it on Audible. And that way, when you're getting your steps in, you can actually listen and accomplish two things at once. So that's a great way to be active and then be feeding your brain and understanding more about how to transition into this way of eating if that's something that you're exploring, or maybe just get a primer and an update on the things that you already know. So that's a great resource. It's right here on the screen. Be sure and scan that. Is there anything else you want to add, Dr. Baker, to today's conversation?
Uh, yeah, well, no, I mean, not too much. I mean, I think you've done a great job summarizing it. I think that hopefully, as we get farther, I'm happy to always answer questions, and I'm, like I said, I don't. It's harder for me to answer questions on social media just because it's so enormous. I mean, it's I've got close to 2 million followers across all accounts, so I can't, so I try to avail myself with meetings. And like, for instance, in Revero, I mean, all of our patients, I meet with them every week, and they can ask me anything they want. And so, and I've got other places where I do lives and things like that. So I like doing it in this format because, one, I don't like to type a bunch of stuff. I mean, it's just, I'd rather just tell the answer and talk rather than have to spend all my day typing stuff, because I just don't enjoy that very much.
That's what voice text is for, Dr. Baker. Um,
Yeah, but then I find I have to go back and correct it, and you go
I
in there because
know.
it makes errors. I used to dictate my operative reports and my clinical notes, and I'd read them, and they were like, "What the hell did they just type?" And it was just like stuff that was nonsensical. So you didn't have to go back in there and it ended up being more trouble than is worse sometimes. But maybe it's getting better.
Yeah. We do have a thank you from, Rumble. The person who had the question about methylene blue said for him or her, I'm not sure, it said, "It has helped me get off antidepressants and I have
Yeah.
more energy, etcetera. I heard about it a long time before I tried it." So, different anecdotal, input, and I think, like, I've heard a lot of people who do the carnivore diet say, "I got off antidepressants." So, that's why we have options too.
Yeah, I mean, it's and again, I like I say, time will tell on these types of things,
Yeah.
and I think that a lot of people, once they start realizing that it's within their own power to affect these things, they do a whole bunch of things. And
Mhm.
and so that's where it's like, well, I started this and I did that and this and changed my diet and slept more and blah blah blah. And then I got better. And then you
Mm.
just don't know what to
Yeah.
credit for. But it could be. It could be that
Yeah.
everything else was exactly the same. And I tell people, if you try a supplement, you should try it objectively, see what it does for you, stop it, try it again, stop it, try it again. If you get like
Mm.
three in a row and it's conclusively, objectively better every time, then it makes sense to utilize. And then hopefully these things are things that are, not chronic for the rest of your life type thing. Because I would hate to say I'd have to take some drug the rest of my life, or whatever
Mhm.
it might be, or
Yeah.
supplement even. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, yeah, and that, yeah, it's interesting. So again, thank you everybody for being here. It is, uh a good the weather's getting good. I wanted to encourage everybody, as always, get outside, touch some grass, try to put down your phone, get away from the social media and all the electronics as much as you can. Especially for Christians, this is a special weekend. It's Holy Week coming into Easter. And so it really is a good time to reflect. If you're thinking about making changes in your life, if you're just, wanting to be more reflective, it's springtime. Just get outside and don't stress. Just like minimize some of the stress in your life and enjoy the moment that you're in. For some people, that's the first step to making changes in your health, is just, take a load off mentally, touch some grass, look at the sky, and put down the electronics and reflect on what's good in your life and the gifts that we've been given. So, I thank everybody for being here. Thank you, Dr. Baker, for your tremendous contribution and for your time and all of the great input that you give us here and for being present with this conversation. I really do appreciate it. And this has been Healing America and Beyond, episode 5 out of a series that we'll be doing together with the Mary Grace Show and the Dr. Shawn Baker Show. We will see you back here soon. And everybody have a great day. If you do want to contact us, you can go to info@marygracemedia.com, especially if you have some questions or maybe suggestions for things that you want to see us discuss on the show. We will be back here soon. Everybody, have a great day. Take care.